People message me. Hello, everybody. My name is Dracel Yilla. I am currently the General Director of our Metro chapter of Emerging 100. Today, we have our guests Charles Wilson and Dee Walk. We will be discussing high-level decision making and how this is impacting on today's society and how we can use this in different ways and different aspects. Go ahead. So Charles Wilson is currently a VP of Operations of Home Depot, and Demetrius Walk is currently a Senior VP of Customer Experience and Delivery. These great gentlemen have been able to work their way up through many different ranks, and they find themselves sitting at the top of a Fortune 25 company where they get to make high-level decisions day to day, and they get to be able to have some insight. And today we are blessed enough to have them on the show to provide us insight and what their day-to-day kind of looks like when it comes to high-level decision making. All right, so a question for you gentlemen, just to get us started. Can you walk us through your process when it comes to evaluating a financial decision with significant impact on the company? Which one wants to go first?
Charles, you want to?
Yeah, I'll jump in and take this one. And good evening, everyone. This is a great question. So there's a couple of things that we do consistently when we're trying to make a decision. The first one is to understand the impact, or we talk about the value of an opportunity or of a decision. So it really starts before that is the problem that we try to solve. Are we solving the right problem? And then how much value does that decision or really create for the organization? And so however you define value is what's important. Value doesn't always have to be financial, and I see that in precursor in there about a financial decision, but value can also be experiential, and sometimes experiences create financial value in the long term. And that's what most loyalty platforms are based on. So the cornerstone of the decision is how do you define and ascribe value to the initiative at hand.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on Charles' statements. And good afternoon, everyone. Another way I think that most companies now are starting to truly define value is taking a customer back view. Is what are their customers asking for, and how does that ask relate back to business value, whether that's sales growth, service growth, etc. And then Charles alluded to then us truly defining the problem that we're trying to solve. How does that problem enable the service growth? A simple one in my space is around our ability to deliver value for our pro customers. And that is done through us being able to deliver on the items that the pros have purchased. Both Charles and I play a lot in this space, whether it's from the store for Charles or through the DCs, and our ability to deliver what they want, when they want, how they want it, and where they want it is defined as value. That value then turns into share wallet. It turns into sales growth. It turns into the repeat sales and their inability to share into our ability to kind of grow our relationship kind of with the pro customer. So that's an example that we tend to use quite often when it comes to how we can grow our financial benefit back for the company.
Okay, and then through y'all personal experience, like what was the process like defining that process? I know a lot of times people go into different companies, different forms of employment, and it's kind of like they work their way through the ranks. Typically the people who have keen decision or like the intangible aspects to certain roles are the ones that are able to kind of find their way to the top of the ranks. So like, how was that process for you guys, and how did you go about defining your own personal process?
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to growth in a company, I think Charles and I's paths, although different but the same, in the way that I think we've grown our ability to grow in the company. And so for me, being external, having a skill set that provided a need for the company, and then being able to come in, display those skills relative to the skill set that I had, match back to the problem that I was asked to solve, and then repeatedly do that across different business units that allow the company to see the value that you can provide and the insight that you have is sometimes called business acumen across different verticals. And then, like, once you're able to do that and prove that you can provide a return, then it's about in corporate America, Fortune 25 company, it's just about timing. Like, there's not a ton of these officer roles available at a company. Um, and being able to be linked to a pipeline or having a history of performance that will allow you to be linked to a pipeline to one of the roles is very, very important, and something that I would say not to be taken lightly is to speak that I want to be on this pipeline, that I'm interested in this job. I think over time will help. And then you have to have two things. You have to have a sponsor, you have to have a champion. And I'm sure Charles will elaborate on that. But like those are the things that I think over time you need to foster your growth throughout the organization that kind of puts you in a position to be blessed enough to be anointed with one of these jobs.
Yeah, D, you hit the nail on the head. A couple of things I would add. One is as you go into a company, your company, the company, always go in with the perspective that this could be the final company that I work for, even though it might not be. Both D and I have worked for several other companies before coming to Home Depot, so that's important. Two is when you get into that company, you have to spend the time to understand the ways of working. Not all companies work the same way internally. And so understanding the landscape and how do we work, how do people advance? There is some written and there's some unwritten rules in every company. And you've got to understand the ways of working so that you can then plug in to those ways of working and give yourself the best opportunity to continue to advance. And then also obviously taking some risk and putting your skills on full display. And then, as Dee said, the last point is about sponsors and champions. That is critically important, and understanding the difference between the two, because it certainly does take a village to advance your career. So don't ever let anybody think that or lead you to believe that they have gotten to where they are on their own, because it always takes a village. And you need sponsors or the people who are inside the room when the decisions are made. And I always say, and it's always, for the most part, wound up being true, is the decision makers are often at least two levels up. And so you want to understand how that plays out in your organization. But the sponsor is the person who is going to bang their fist on the table and advocate and shout your name. Champions exist all around your organization internally. And a champion is just someone who says positive things about you. And we always want to be building champions. That's your brand. They're sort of like your brand advocate. They help to elevate your brand. Champions are not always sponsors, but champions are also important because they're lifting your brand up while your sponsor is in the room advocating on your behalf. So it's important to understand the two, but also critically important to understand that you need both.
Oh, most definitely. Thank you for that feedback and that insight. I think that transitions us to our next question. How do you balance data-driven analysis with intuition or experience in major financial decisions?
Yeah. So I have to be a little thoughtful in how I answer. Look, The best way to lead with fact is to lead with data, where you have access to data. And intuition is around your hypotheses, right? Like every problem that you solve, you should solve the problem with a hypothesis, and then you accept or reject it by leveraging data to help you prove your hypothesis, right? So the data is fact-driven, it's specific to an outcome. Hopefully your outcome is customer back specifically. And then your intuition is around your hypothesis in your research. So in my space, so I'm a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, product certified. 5Ds is an approach that product folks use a lot to determine the way to best solve technology. It's the define, the discover, the design, the develop, the deploy. And so in your define and discover process is when a lot of time your intuition comes into play, because you think you know about the way to solve it, or you have history, or you have experience. But Charles said it earlier, when you come into a new environment, ways of working is really important to learn the way you have to go about it. You should balance that with data. That's where facts come into play. Now, data is not the end all be all when it comes to decision making. But if it is a financial driven, you have a CBA, you're looking at MPV, or if you're looking at ROI, you really need a strong CBA to help drive the outcomes, to get additional funding, to get additional support in order to drive that ROI for you. And so intuition is your experience, it is your thought, but the CBA needs to be supported by data, needs to be supported by facts in order to make that major decision financially, because that's where the company tends to put their financial support. It's when there's a CBA, an ROI, MPV, whatever that may be, that the company uses to help make that decision. Those facts and data is the thing that's going to help your financial vertical kind of stamp the acknowledgement that this is a good investment to make.
See, I learned from the best. So there's not a lot I could add to that because D taught me everything he just said. But that being the case, I will add just a little bit to it. And the one word that I would ask is testing. You cannot be afraid to test. And we run into this all the time. Every business runs into it. You call it intuition. You could also call it tribal knowledge, right? Tribal knowledge permeates through every single organization. And it's just in those age-old adages or those sayings, etc. And so tribal knowledge becomes intuition because we've always done it that way. We've always seen that. That's what it's always been. Then you get the data, right? And the data might tell you something else, but it's in conflict with what's become our norm internally. And the only way to prove it is to go ahead and test. And so sometimes, like your test, when we're testing, it doesn't have to be extensive or exhaustive testing. You could do very simple tests to prove the theory of the case. Either the data that exists is going to support your outcomes, and this goes back to your problem statement and your hypothesis, as Dee touched on. But you can do very simple tests to go either left or right. And really in your test, it can even cast a shadow or a little bit of reasonable doubt on your tribal knowledge. And oftentimes that's enough to go to a next stage of testing or expand the test to really prove it out. So data is really good. Intuition can be good, but a lot of the intuition and things, at least in our business in retail, is oftentimes around customer behaviors. But we've seen customer behaviors change rapidly over time. All right. No one ever thought that we would be paying a premium for convenience. right? And, I'll pay for Uber Eats, except the store is, 3 blocks down. The restaurant is 3 blocks away from my house, but I'll still pay a premium to have it delivered downstairs, so I don't have to walk that 3 blocks up and 3 blocks back. So we're paying. So that intuition is starting to fall by the wayside, and we have to be aware of that. So, in a nutshell, don't be afraid to test, to challenge those, to come out with where are we today versus where we might have been historically.
Okay, and then from y'all personal experience, what have been kind of like your big three do nots when it comes to this topic? Or from personal experience of failures?
Yeah. I mean, I fail every day. So it's like we get something wrong every day, but you can't be afraid to fail, but don't assume, right? The biggest mistake you can make is to make an assumption about an outcome. Spend the time to go through the process and be vigilant. So I would say don't assume. And then I would say the second one is take partners. Working in the silo usually doesn't come out in positive outcomes. And you can miss a lot of things. One is working cross-functionally or bringing in a community helps to challenge your thought process, and oftentimes results in better outcomes. We had a business review, D&I, we used to participate in. It was almost like a gauntlet. And I might not even know about the content and be very well versed in it, but I would ask questions. Those questions help the team get better at their outcomes. And so it does take oftentimes a community. So no assumptions, invite others in, don't develop in a silo.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on Charles's insight, which he was dead on. The one that I think, as young folk, I'll say young because I'm an old cat here, but like, don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, quite often, as the individual who's trying to solve the problem, we think we need to over index on our intellectual horsepower, which feeds into Charles BYOB. Bring your own business partners, not what you think BYOB means. In this case, it's bring your own business partner. Like, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Because when you ask for help, that means you probably truly understand the problem. That probably means you know kind of the end-to-end view of what's needed to get it done. And you can't get it done by yourself, right? So that means you've discovered, or you've defined and discovered, we would typically want you to do that with others. But like, the biggest thing, and this is just in life, not just in business, in everything, we are so afraid to ask for help because we think that is a sign of weakness. And I'm just telling you, Charles said it, we fail every day. The fastest way to learn is to fail. It's not to succeed, by the way. When you fail at something, you now know how not to do it. You now know how to establish whatever your design criteria is to design that out. When you succeed at something, when you're successful at it, you stop learning. Our minds turn off if you're not curious enough. And so failure is a sign of strength, and help is a sign of strength in the context of making sure you're doing it with the community and you're not.
All right. Thank y'all for that input. That was definitely insightful. And I think that transitions us to the next aspect of this show. How do you incorporate in potential market volatility or economic uncertainty into your decision-making process?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to COVID for a minute, right? Uncertainty, the business are having to make decisions about what we need to do, what levers to pull to service our customers. We're in retail. Without customers, it's hard to have growth. And you are presented with some restrictions. In your metropolitan areas, you couldn't have people in your stores, so you have to find another way to serve your customers. There was a decision that the Home Depot made to do it curbside. In other metropolitan or other areas, urban or rural, you could have people in your store. And so there was decisions that you had to make to crowd limit. And then Charles had to go figure out with his team the best way to do that and then provide that back. And so volatility is or could be addressed two ways. One, you could address volatility through interpretation, benchmarking, et cetera, or you can address it reactively, just trying to respond to what's in front of you. The first one you try to do strategically with environmental scans, benchmarking, and other things to learn as much as you can about the environment in which you're operating in retail, where things are changing, the landscape are changing, and you're trying to skate where the puck is going, not where the puck is, right? And so that's that in anticipation. The reactive part is just seeing what's in front of you, anticipating what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day, next week. It's more short-term, 30-day vision to react versus 2, 3, 5-year planning. So those are the two ways I think uncertainty impacts us. And the decision-making is still the same. Know the problem you're trying to solve. Know the customers that you're trying to appease from an outcome perspective. Set your hypothesis. Go through your step-by-step process identification, and then just work the process is the simple way I think to put it.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. I would also say, particularly when you're talking about economic uncertainty, there's always going to be a point where you're trying to mitigate the downside, right? Because if it's uncertain, you don't know if it's going to go up or down. And 9 times out of 10, you're trying to hedge, and hopefully macroeconomics or the economics are not going to drive your business down artificially. The key thing that everybody is going to try to do, it doesn't matter what business you're in, is going to try to maintain the same experience level. If you're selling, so you could say today, if you're selling cars, if you're selling hardware like we do, et cetera, at the end of the day, there's a lot of conversations going on about tariffs, which brings a lot of economic uncertainty. And every company is trying to mitigate the downside risk of what if, but you still have to maintain the experience. So you can't walk into Mercedes-Benz and not have any cars on the lot because you're afraid of, tariffs. You still have to have cars on the lot. You still have to have people in suits. You still have to maintain that experience. Maybe you don't bring in as many cars, right? So you try to mitigate the downside, but you also have a contingency plan if things don't go as bad as you might anticipate, right? So there's often a lot of analysis involved in how bad could it be? But if not, you have the scenario analysis that go on. But the cornerstone of any business is maintaining the experience. Even if you're doing software development and you think people are going to put their hands in their pockets and not invest in that, you still got to maintain your current base. You still have licenses out there. Whatever that case is, you still have to provide a high level of service while you're trying to navigate into the future. And so, every company goes through that level of uncertainty. Sometimes it's from macroeconomics. Sometimes it's from new competitors into the market. It could be anything that brings uncertainty, but it's about leveraging and mitigating the downside that everybody tries to do as best as they can.
Okay. And then over the course of, I would say, like the last 10 years, we've been in a lot of interesting situations with the pandemic, with presidency and stuff. How has your thought process behind this changed during that time?
Look, I always think with environmental situations, whether it's your mental health, whether it's your corporate stress, whether it's personal stress, the environment plays a really big role on the way that we interpret life, right? Just in general. And so, right, for me, it's just trying to stay balanced in my thought of what's important. I'm a big family first guy. Like, there's nothing more important to me than my wife and my 2 boys. And so I try and do everything when I get home to be balanced in my interactions with them. I try as much as I can not to bring work home, but I also try and be a listening ear for them and try and have the most pointed encouragement for them as I can, knowing that those same environmental stress points are probably impacting them as well. And so for me, as an African American man, I just try and lead by example, right? Work as hard as you can, be as balanced as you can, be as understanding as you can, lend a listening ear. And a listening ear doesn't always mean you got to say something back. There's multiple ways to listen. You can listen with your eyes, you can listen with your ears. I just try and listen both ways. And, you know, trying to be understanding. It hasn't changed my decision making. Like the environment hadn't changed my decision making. It hadn't changed my perspective on life. It hasn't impacted my family values, because I've just tried to be balanced in my thought of what I want to achieve and what I want my family to achieve. And in order to do that, you got to force yourself to stay balanced in your thought, work, home, etc. But that's kind of the way I've tried to manipulate the last 10 years and be thoughtful in the way that I interact with my family.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I'm also a big family first person. Nothing more important than that. And so at some point in time, for me, the thing that made me realize that is, once upon a time in my career, I was packaged out from a company. And I've been working really hard and 80+ hour weeks and gotten good reviews. And the company I was with basically downsized in half. It was in consulting, and lost a lot of its clientele. And it was a business decision. If the company's going to stay afloat, you can't keep the same headcount. And I was on the odd side of that decision. Of course, you take it personally for a while until I started to really understand it was just a business decision. It wasn't personal. But at the end of the day, what I realized is, as you go through those ups and downs in your life and your career, the one cornerstone, it took that for me to realize the people who were still standing there at the end of that was my family. And I'd taken a lot of time away from them, et cetera. And so that was my catalyst for saying, you know, nothing will ever come of being more important than them. So that was my experience. That was my journey. And then you just plan for contingencies with your family. Everybody's always going to make sacrifices. I'm probably more on the side of, you know, it's tough to really have true work-life balance if you're going to be growing your career. But how do you make those key moments count? How do you, you know, find those connection points like Dee was talking about and make them count? Because you're going to have to sacrifice if you're going to continue to advance your career. But finding the time and making those key moments count, connecting on a deeper level, even if you can, but being present. Those are important things.
Okay, and I think y'all both touched on a topic that a lot of Black men, especially like growing up, me transitioning, getting further in my career, how do you go about balancing yourself so that you can make those high level decisions when you get to work? Because you guys said it exactly. Your family and your outside life kind of impacts how you present yourself in other areas of life. So how have you guys been able to manage that as Black men, and what advice could you give like younger Black men coming up on kind of that tip?
Yeah, for me, and this is something I preach to my boys. It is easy to create the excuse in your head why you can't be great, or the excuse in your head why things may not be going your way. And don't create the excuse, right? Like, hard work really pays off. And I'm sure there's situations where we may not think that that's the case. But when that's the case, you're not working for yourself. You're trying to work to prove something to somebody else. That's when we tend to create the excuse. And so, like my story, Charles, have heard this, and Drizel, you've heard this. Like, I'm just some dumb country boy from Mississippi, right? Like, I'm not the smartest cat in the room, right? I'm not the most handsomest guy in the room, but what you won't do is outwork me. What you won't do is like outthink me. And so like that's my mentality when I wake up, because I'm working for my family, not working to prove something to somebody else. And like that's the message I preach to the two young men that God blessed me to be a part of their lives. It's like, hey, like don't create the excuse. Like don't be outworked. Always have a positive outlook and know what you're working for. Know who you're working for. Like you're not trying to prove anything to anybody else. All God has asked us to be is the best version of ourselves. The best version of me is not going to be as glamorous and as smart as Charles. It's just not going to be. Charles is a very brilliant young man. Like I know, but to be the best version of me, D-Walk, I know the value D-Walk can have. I'm not going to be as smart as Charles. I'm not going to look as good as Drizel. And so I just got to be the best version of me. I got to be who God made me to be. Because I think that's enough. Like being the best version of you is enough. And the minute we think it's not enough, that's when we get ourselves into trouble. And so for me, I just wake up every day. I preach this to my boys. Just go be the best version of you that you can be. And I promise you it's enough. Don't try to be who somebody else is, because you can't be. When God made us all, he broke the mold. There's only one of us, unless you have a twin. And even twins, a twin, they are different personalities. They're not the same. That mold was broken. We may look similar, but our behaviors are different. And so I just say, just go be the best version of yourself you can be.
I can't follow that up. I mean, I get to work with this joker every day. and so, you know, D hit the nail on the head. And there are two things that I would add to that. Thing number one is pay attention. And not a lot of people really mean by that is when you go into an organization, you decide that this company or this could be it, or this is right, or I want to advance, to this level or that level, and that's one of my personal goals. It's great. Pay attention to the people who are already there. What do they do? What are some of the traits that they displayed? Maybe be so adventurous as to approach them and say, hey, can I have a few minutes of your time? I'm trying to understand a little bit better. At some point in time, some of you guys might have, ventured off and joined a fraternity at some point in time. You had to go out and venture and ask. You had to go and talk to somebody to figure out if that was something that you wanted to do. How do I become a part? It's no different in the workplace. But you got to pay attention. I'll give you a personal example. Early on, before I came to Home Depot in my consultant career, what I paid attention to was how people spoke. And they spoke in partners in about very, very slowly. To me, being a New Yorker, born and raised, it was annoyingly slow. But that slow dialect gave them command of the room. People were on edge, waiting for the next word to come out. That was insight. But if I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't have sort of grasped that and then been able to apply that, which helped, position me for advancement in that company. So paying attention is important. The second thing is I'll double down on what D said is like hard work matters. And I have two sons and a daughter, and my oldest is a freshman in college, and he's going through his sort of freshman year woes. It's not as easy as it was in high school, and he's learning that. And this is a true story. I was talking to him over the weekend, and he reached out to my sister. My sister is 2 years older than me, and they're having a conversation, and she asked him how it was going, and he has a couple of A's and mostly B's, right? And that's not his norm, and he's disappointed himself. And talking to my sister, she said, yeah, your dad just breezed through school. School just came easy for him, both in undergrad and in grad school. It was just easy for him. And I said, oh, no, it didn't. And that's what he said. He said, yeah, Auntie Fran said it was just easy for you. I said, no, it wasn't easy for me. Like, what I didn't talk about was the fact that I had my classes during the day, but I would get up at 5 and I would read a chapter ahead so I know the questions to ask when I got to class, even though they hadn't taught the material. Then I went to work out, I grabbed lunch, and I went back to my room and I studied. My first 2 years, that's all I did. I came out of my room, I went to the cafeteria to get dinner, and I came back and I studied. It was 5 a.m. to 11:45 every day and on the weekends. Didn't go to any parties, didn't do any of that stuff for my first 2 years. And I was at an HBCU. So, I was crazy to, miss all of the excitement that was going on. And the ratio of women to men was like 5-1. But I missed a lot. But I was also afraid because my mama told me if I got anything lower than a B, that she was going to send me back home and I was going to go to Brooklyn College. I went to Hampton. So I didn't want to leave. So I had that fear driving my work ethic. But I tell you that, and I share that, is because sometimes there's a perception that people just get there by coasting. No, we're ducks on the pond, paddling as hard as you don't know to just get across to the other side. And it's exhausting. And yeah, we have to paddle hard and many, many times harder, faster, and longer to get to the same endpoint as others do.
Man, that was some great feedback, some great answers. I guess, too, that provides a lot of insight for me as a person, but I know we have to transition to our next question, if I remember correctly, if we have one more. When making decisions that involve significant financial risk, how do you build consensus among other executives or board members?
I mean, I'll jump in here. Until you have the top seat in the house, it really is not your decision. Our job as, we'll call it, mid-level executives is to bring the facts to the table and a point of view. That is our job, and it's to be exhaustive in, bringing those facts and the points of view to the table. And you bring forward a recommendation, but you realize the company is counting on you as an individual to be an expert in whatever it is that you're working on. And so you have to bring that expertise hat to bear every day and make sure you turn over every rock, uncover every insight, but you are bringing facts to the table to enable a decision to be made. That decision is not ultimately yours. You can have a bias, but you're enabling the right decision to be made. So and that took me a little bit of a while to really understand, even as an officer. It's just like the decisions are often made a few levels up, but they are asking questions and they are probing to validate that I, as an individual, and my teams have done their due diligence and are truly the experts on the space or the subject matter to enable the right decision to be made for the enterprise. So, hopefully that decision is encompassing enough to mitigate any downside or financial risk. You've tested. I go back to what I said earlier. You test to validate your hypothesis, that word that Dee made, so that when you go have these discussions, these are all data points that hopefully support your point of view to enable a decision to be made. But even after all of that, sometimes the facts can be there and a decision is made to go the other way. And that's okay too, right? As long as the work was diligent and accurate.
Yeah, Charles hit the nail on the head. The tactical part of what Charles kind of laid out is this. As Charles and I sit in a business review, what we hope is that our teams got together, build consensus among others. They got together and they are presenting a concerted presentation together saying this is what the team believes we need to do to, decrease risk financially or mitigate risk. And this is what we all have agreed to do. Here are the things that we have agreed that we need to do to offset it. Anytime that there's a group presenting together, not the individual, again, the BYOB, right? It's the community saying this is what we need to do. Here's why we need to do it. It is a higher likely that you're going to bring us, the folks who are sitting in the room, along with you, because we see that there's this, groupthink and concerted effort to prove out the hypothesis. You've said, here's how we think we can solve the problem. The problem was clear. And here's the roadmap that we think we can get there and the investment needed in order to do so. And so it is a better position to be in when there are consensus and then there's a group presenting, then there's an individual presenting where their questions could come about and then that individual is having to defend themselves. And so how Charles articulated it is right. Like you gotta be thinking about the way that you're going to approach it and the way that you're going to solve it. But what I can't do is just allow Charles to skip over. Like he was at Hampton. I too went to an HBCU. I told y'all Charles was smarter than me. I partied all the time. I'm just going to tell you what I did. Like I was no studying ahead. Like I can't even, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And Charles is in a fraternity and I am as well. But like two different, and you would have thought I would have said what Charles said, because I know what fraternity that he's in. He would have been the party goer and I would have been the person studying, but that's not the case in this.
It's funny. I almost was about to mention the fraternity aspect, but I don't know if y'all want to butt heads on that one today.
No, there's no button head. Charles and I are hey, look, simply put, we are the beginning and the end. And I'll just leave it at that.
But to follow up to the discussion, like you guys spoke about like the decision making and stuff, but what are some of the skill sets needed to help cultivate this so that you approach it the correct way?
Yeah, like the way everything needs to be driven through a team. And I think, and I'll just talk about the company that we are currently at. When you are trying to solve a problem, there's no single group that can solve a problem by themselves because of the tentacles of the horizontal process that it takes to produce products, widgets, whatever you want to call it, right? And as you can clearly define what those things are, where in the process, the landscape of organizational design, these things are happening, and you are including those folks with alignment, like that's how you can instill development over time for your teams, where they now always know when it comes to organizational design, like those vertical teams and how decisions are made in those vertical teams dictate the way horizontally we can get things done to mitigate kind of whatever that financial risk is relative to the problem that you're trying to solve. And so like the skills are going to be within those verticals, but the way that we govern ourselves, the way that leadership apply those skills to that is through the questions we ask, through the insight that the teams are providing to us, the way strategically that we try and lay out the levers that need to be considered. And in that consideration, you would hope that the team comes back with the defined thing that's needed. Data, right? There's going to be SMEs across the company, right? Or across that business unit. Financial is always going to be one. If you're in the process, you're going to probably have a process person associated with it. You need to have someone in the business right? Depending on kind of the business vertical. So those skill sets within those vertical functions will always need to be represented in order to help drive the decision across the finish line.
Yeah, just trust your team. I'll come back to some things. Customer back is a skill set that does have to be developed by some. Sometimes you can get to solutioning in a silo, but not thinking with the customer lens. And again, that's the point of having a team, is you've got to help your team to develop those skill sets so they can be the subject matter experts. If you're always giving the answers, your team just becomes a group of followers, and then you actually wind up creating groupthink. If you're sitting in a room and nobody's pushing back on your thoughts or your hypothesis, that's not a good room to be in. That's a room full of followers. It's going to be very sort of myopic, very siloed, tunnel vision. And that one is going to lead to most likely suboptimal outcomes. So, you want voices in there, and then be customer back.
Okay, cool. Great feedback. I think now we're going to transition to opening up a Q&A for our audience to be able to access questions. For those who've been tuning in, let's hear what you guys have to say. Any questions, comments, or anything you would like our guests to kind of give some insight on. I'm not certain. I know we have the comments section. Well, there hasn't been any questions yet, but I'll just throw in a question real quick, personal question. I've been able to work with both of y'all very closely, been able to study both of y'all. The biggest thing I've always wanted to ask the both of y'all, through the different norms that we go through in the Black community and some of the cultural things we have built into our community, and then transitioning to corporate America, like, what was the journey like to be able to kind of have to reprogram yourself in certain aspects when it comes to things that in the Black community we see as a cultural norm, but it might not be viewed as totality across the board as something positive? What was that transition like for you guys as you guys moved up the ranks?
Yeah, for me, like, as a young pup, like, I thought I needed to be someone I was not. As the old dog, I said it earlier, there shouldn't be any transition. Just go be you. Like, I think to me, that's the problem, that we're trying to be somebody that we're not. Now, that doesn't mean not to have executive presence. That doesn't mean to think about kind of what you're wearing to work. Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying from a personality, from a being able to express yourself, I think you have to be yourself. You got to find your way to be you. I'll say it that way. You got to find your way to be you. And what I mean by that is, like, I am country. Like, my T's and R's, I'll talk proper when I'm around Charles. Like, I try to make, he's from New York. He just said when people talk slow, he don't like it. And so, like, I have to be real cursed in kind of like my audience. I know when I need to kind of be a little bit more proper, but I also know when I'm in a DC and I'm in Stonecrest, Georgia, I can be me. If I'm in Newark, I probably need to talk a little more crisp and speed my language up a little bit. You know what I mean? And so it's just finding a way to be you and knowing the audience in which you are speaking with, I think, is the best way to not have to be so dynamic in the environment. Because I am me. Like, what you guys see here, I think Charles and Giselle, like, this is me. I'm like this all the time, regardless of where I am, because I'm now comfortable being me. So the quicker you can be comfortable with you and knowing that you are enough, there is no, I have to be so dynamic and I'm switching when I'm one place to another. It's just knowing how to make those small adjustments when you're in that environment, but still find a way to get to being you.
I would agree. And sometimes it does come a little bit later in life, or particularly in your corporate journey. And I realize and I acknowledge, because it happened to me, there early in your career, there can be a strong desire to conform, because conformity is what you see as the path to advancement. Um, and so there's a little bit of that in there. But also, you have to balance that with not conforming brings new and differentiated thinking. And as long as you're in the environment that welcomes that, then that can be a separating factor. And that can be also leaning into yourself. So I'll just tell you, my quick story, and the thing that D&I shares, we got stories for everything. But having been, I was trying to get promoted to a district manager, and I kept getting passed up. And so what I noticed, and this goes back to my earlier comment about paying attention, the three people who had gotten promoted before me were very outgoing, gregarious, big personality type of individuals. And they were getting promoted, and they had favor with, at least in my eyes, with the VP. And that's not me. I'm an extreme introvert, or can be. And so I went on this journey trying to become what they were in search of a promotion. And as much as I tried, it was so uncomfortable for me, because that's not who I was. Who I was a good problem solver. I was a great operator, and I could turn red numbers black. That was my specialty. And internally, I made the decision, this has got to be enough, because I'm looking around at everybody else, and not everybody's able to do this. This has got to be enough, and I'll just have to find a different way. So the way I found was, the decision maker happened to be a Cowboys fan. And boo to anybody out there that's a Cowboys fan. But I'm a Giants fan. And back then, the Giants were actually good. And so I started to take some shots at him and rib him about how bad the Cowboys were. And that built a bond. And a few months later, I was promoted. So, part of that goes back to what Dee says, is you have to lean into your strengths and make your strengths the biggest asset that you have, and make them not just strengths, but make them towering strengths. How can you make what you do well even better? So much so that it's better than anybody else, right? That's where you find your happy space. That's where you find joy in what you're doing, because that's why athletes just love to work out and do what they do, because they're doing what they find joy in, right? In this work environment, you have to find that thing that you do and that you really enjoy. And then again, you'll start to feel like, I really never have to work a day in my life.
Okay, cool. And I think we have one more final question from the audience. I think we're going to display it on screen real quick. Question: how can we manage to build while pulling others into success?
Yeah, so I know y'all heard that old cliche, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Yeah.
And so, that's a really good question. And both Charles and I have been in a situation where we've tried to encourage and pull others up with us. Some people don't want to work hard to get there. They want something given. Nothing is given, everything is earned. And so, to me, there's one of those things that happen when you are trying to mentor people. Both Charles and I mentor a lot of people. And the most common thing that I've seen in the people that I mentor that has the greatest success is their desire and want to be great. And they know what's valuable to them, and they know what's not valuable to them. And what I mean by that is, When you are young, you are at a point in which you can sacrifice things, right? When you're my age, like my willingness to sacrifice has gone down. I can't sacrifice a ton of time now as a father, head of the household, and doing stuff like this and other things. So like, but when I was young, a career mentor told me, listen, you have to be willing to sacrifice. So those individuals who both Charles and I have been able to help grow their career at the Home Depot or other places are those individuals who know what they're willing to sacrifice at the point in where they are in their life. Time could go either way. Time meaning I'm going to spend extra time. Time meaning I'm going to go to a place to learn more about something. Those are the folks that I've truly had pleasure to partner with, because those folks are hungry to learn. They're hungry to understand. They don't come with excuses. Like those are the things I think when you're trying to build up a person's mental aspect. Of course, like corporate America is mental way more than it's physical. And so that mental aspect is having the confidence that you need, that you can go achieve how high outcomes. But a lot of that has to do with your individual makeup and your desire to just be great. Like, notice what I said, like, you ain't going to outwork me. You sure in the heck ain't going to outthink me. Like, that's just how I wake up in the morning. And so like people like that, I think being stubborn about you can have and be successful, I think is a good thing, but not to be brass about it and always learning. Charles and I learn from each other all the time. We go into stores to learn from every associate in the store. We're not too big to learn because we know we learn every day. I learn from my boys, learn from my wife, I learn from my neighbor, I learn from a toddler. It like learning shouldn't be pegged by your age, about who you are. Learning is just about being able to consume information and having that information be used in other ways. And so that's the way I think in our ability to pull people up and help build them. They got to have something in them to build on before we can build them. You can't build on top of something that's not there. You need a foundation in order to build on top of it.
Yeah, I love that. I'll tackle the last part while pulling others into success. And I'll start by repeating what Dee said. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I can tell you with all of the people that I mentor who are, and most of the mentoring is about the same thing and about questions like this is how do I advance or how do I manage these situations and maneuver in this corporate space. And I can tell you that execution happens, maybe it's at best case, it's in thirds. Third of people will take the message that you give them and go ahead and execute on it. And I don't even think, to be honest with you, I don't even know if it's thirds. Some might halfway step into it, but the last third won't do anything with it. And the metrics may even be worse than that, to be candid. But the common thread that I often tell people is you got to go in and ask the tough questions, right? You got to ask the tough questions. And so here's an example. Let's say you're in a position, you've been doing this job for a while. Rule number one, head down, good work only gets you so far in any company, period. Keep your head down, doing good work might get you, and depending on the company, it could get you to a manager level. Depending on a company, it could get you to a director level. If it's a startup, it might get you to a VP level when there's only 5 of you because it's a startup. And so de facto, you're that person. Head down, good work will get you only to a certain level, but it will not get you beyond. When you hit up against that ceiling, you're trying to break through, that's where the mentors, that's where I see the flood of people coming in and having a conversation and trying to navigate again. Ask the tough questions. So there's an opening coming up, right? Hey, head down, I do good work. Hopefully most people are sitting there, fingers crossed. Hopefully they'll come and ask me to do that job. Nope, not going to happen. Right? Why? I mean, you assume that your good work and your head down is going to give you a key, a ticket to the dance, and it doesn't. So you might go and have a conversation and say, hey, if that position's opens, would you consider it? Your leader says, yeah, I would consider you. Not the tough question. The tough question to ask is, if and when this position opens, am I the number one candidate since you're the making decision? And if not, what do I need to do to solidify myself as a number one question? Now that's the tough question. And why is it so tough? Because you got to be prepared for the answer. And the answer might be, no, you're not. But that's the greatest answer you could get, because at least now you can craft a plan. At least now you understand where you are. But that can be a scary thing. And that's why I say the execution often happens in thirds. I tell people that all the time, right? Because you're actually in some ways creating a contract between yourself and the decision maker. Because if they told you why you're not, and you craft a plan to become what they're looking for, it's going to be hard for them to look in your eye and tell you why not. So either that means you didn't meet those goals and objectives that y'all talked about and discussed, and maybe there was a misalignment, then you got to go cover that down. But, when it comes to these decision making, and listen, I'm telling you as a leader who's hired many people, is if someone comes to me and asks that question, that's going to make my decision easier. That's going to be a no-brainer as long as you hold up your end to the contract and to those expectations. But I'm still waiting for, as much as I've given that advice, I'm still waiting for that person to come into my office and ask me, am I the person that you will select for this next opportunity? Do I have the skill sets, traits, and characteristics commiserate with what you're looking for so I can continue to develop my career? That still hasn't happened. I've probably given that to over 100 people. Now, maybe they've gone and taken it to their different business units, et cetera. My guess is there's a little bit of a fear in really pulling back that blanket and letting the truth come out. And, to advance at some point in time, you have to conquer your fears.
Okay, great feedback, great questions, everybody. I would like to say thank you to our guests for coming on. Like you guys said, everything is a sacrifice. Thank y'all for sacrificing this time, coming, supporting me and my brothers and our YouTube channel. Shout out to my brothers who are on the show right now. Support. Shout out to Brother Brad, because he also did help bring our guest onto the show. And I know he's watching right now. So thank you, everybody, for your time. And I believe we have one more slide. And please go ahead and support our chapter. The Emerging 100 of North Metro Atlanta is excited to get to work with you and your help. We continue to serve. Give today, impact tomorrow. We welcome your support as we invest in the next generation of leaders, doers, and thinkers. Our upcoming signature summer social will feature our first ever youth hackathon. Scan and click to give a thank you. So this is going to be a great event. We have our youth. We're hosting a hackathon where we're getting them to create some type of AI chatbot, if I remember correctly. So this is a great chance for our youth to show their skill set and to continue grow and prosper. So I believe that's everything for today.
Appreciate you guys having us.
No problem at all. We'd love to have y'all back on if you want to come on for a different topic in the future.
Absolutely.
I was trying to get Tim to come on, but he had a previous obligation he had to attend.
Tim is not a part of the beginning and the end. He's somewhere out in the wild red yonder. So we'll leave him there.
I definitely got to get all three of y'all on the episode again. I'm going to love that one.
Hey, you won't get anything done if the three of us are there.
All right.
All right. Appreciate it.
Appreciate
Talk
it.
to you guys.
Have a good one. All right.